Usually when we talk about a window, there's this implicit expectation of transparency. Like it's a lens. You look through it, you observe the world outside, and the glass itself is, well, it's functionally invisible.
Right. You aren't meant to notice the pain. You're just meant to notice the view.
Exactly. It serves this purely binary function.
Hmm.
Inside versus outside. The structure is just there to provide comfort, to keep the Wegger out.
And to offer that illusion that we can participate in the world without actually being touched by it.
Right, but the moment you introduce the crushing psychological pressure of displacement, of living in a landscape that fundamentally does not belong to you,
Yeah.
that window ceases to be invisible.
Yeah, you stop looking through the glass and you start staring at the glass itself.
You start noticing the microfractures, the condensation, just the immense invisible pressure pushing against the frame.
Because it's no longer just a barrier, is it?
Yeah.
It becomes the absolute definition of a rigid structure suspended in this state of pre-shattering. It's literally holding back a storm of unsaid things.
And that structure, waiting to shatter, is the mind of the modern immigrant. And I mean, I don't think I have ever seen that immense atmospheric pressure captured quite as perfectly as it is in Nirasha Gunasekera's 2017 poetry collection, Beaming Petals in a Henna Vine.
It really is a masterpiece of that exact tension.
It is. So, for you listening, welcome to our deep dive today. We are looking at a work written in Sinhala, but born entirely out of the Sri Lankan diaspora experience in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, and the author's navigating the blistering heat of Queensland and then, the freezing domestic isolation of a Melbourne winter. But he's doing it all through the linguistic architecture of his homeland.
Right. And that friction between the language of origin and the landscape of exile is really where the genius of this collection lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Because he isn't writing a traditional nostalgic ode to the motherland. That's a pretty tired trope at this point.
Right. We've seen that a million times.
Exactly. Gunasekera is mapping the exact geometry of a mind that is realized home is now, well, an abstract concept.
Yeah.
It's a place he can neither physically return to nor fully recreate in the Australian suburbs.
Yeah.
The entire collection operates in this localized melancholia. It's an exploration of the suffocating tension of modern domesticity and just the absolute persistence of memory.
So rather than taking a superficial tour of the entire book today, we're doing something highly surgical. We have isolated 11 specific poems from the collection.
Just 11.
Just 11. We're looking at poems 11, 15, 17, 24, 27, 32, 34, 36, 37, 38, and 39. And when you extract these specific pillars and align them side by side, this hidden continuous narrative emerges.
It really does. It isn't a chronological story, though.
No, not at all. It is the slow, agonizing documentation of a man standing behind his own glass window, watching the world happen until the pressure finally just becomes unbearable.
And we begin that observation on the sand, actually.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with poem 24, right?
Yes. Poem 24, at Gold Coast, Queensland. And it immediately subverts any expectation you might have about the Australian diaspora narrative.
Right, because the Gold Coast is like the international symbol of leisure.
Exactly. It's sun, surf, liberation. But Gunasekera strips all the romance out of the landscape. He completely weaponizes the weather.
He really does. The narrator is standing on this golden beach, surrounded by the iconic imagery of girls in bikinis, but the gaze, it isn't celebratory, and it certainly isn't the gaze of a tourist on holiday.
No, it's incredibly heavy.
Right. I want to look at the exact imagery he uses here. He describes the tanning process in 40-degree heat, which is, well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit for those of us using that system.
Unbearably hot.
Unbearably. But he doesn't focus on the ocean breeze. He focuses on the skin turning dark and specifically this claustrophobic detail of the sweat pooling under their bra straps.
And that specific detail, the sweat under the strap, is such a brilliant mechanical choice by him. He's pulling the camera all the way in to create a sense of physical discomfort.
It makes you squirm.
Yeah, because the sun here is not giving life. It's an oppressive, almost tyrannical force. The bodies on the beach are enduring a brutal ritual of assimilation. They're baking themselves.
That's the exact feeling I couldn't quite put my finger on when I first read it. It feels almost anti-erotic.
Completely.
You have this classic setup of a man observing women in bikinis, but it reads like he's watching meat cure in the sun.
Yeah, it's clinical.
So my question for you is he simply a voyeur who resents the leisure he sees? Or is the physical disgust, the focus on the sweat and the oppressive heat, a manifestation of his own total alienation from this culture?
It's entirely the latter, though it's disguised as a former.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you read the line breaks in the Sinhala,
Uh-huh.
or even in the English translation, the pacing is just exhausted. The narrator cannot partake in this ritual of sun worship.
He's tired.
Deeply tired. He is fundamentally incompatible with the scene. He's watching the local culture perform its most sacred rite, which is leisure, and he finds it agonizing. He's the eternal outsider.
Yeah. And that agony doesn't just stay on the beach. He explicitly mentions that this exact image, the sweating, baking bodies, it follows him home. It haunts him at night when he closes his eyes.
He's traumatized by the sheer endurance of the culture he's trying to exist within.
Yeah, and this idea of observing a ritual you don't belong to, it bleeds so perfectly into poem 11, in a cherry orchard.
Yes, we move from the blistering public arena of the beach into this highly curated, quiet agricultural space, the cherry orchard.
Right.
Here, the narrator is watching a woman, presumably a partner or a companion, engaged in the act of picking fruit.
But the way she picks the fruit is intensely neurotic. Like, she isn't just gathering cherries, she is ruthlessly curating them.
That's a great word for it, curating.
Yeah, the poem describes her searching exclusively for the perfect blood-red cherries. If her fingers graze a cherry that is even slightly half-ripe or bruised, she violently discards it. She throws it into the brush.
She demands absolute perfection from the orchard.
Exactly.
And look at the verb choices Gunasekera uses there. The discarding is not casual, it's frustrated. This is the neurosis of the diaspora experience manifesting in a domestic, mundane task.
Wait, how do you mean?
Well, when you uproot your life and move across the world, there's this immense crushing pressure to make the sacrifice worth it.
Right.
You must extract only the absolute best from the new country.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you cherry pick literally the prestigious schools, the affluent neighborhoods, the flawless produce. You cannot tolerate the half-ripe or the flawed, because admitting a flaw means admitting the migration itself might have been a mistake.
Oh, wow. So she's trying to sanitize her reality.
Precisely.
But the poem doesn't let her get away with it, does it? Because of what is sitting in the bushes.
The bird.
Yes, while she is curating her perfect blood-red basket, there is a common blackbird watching her from the wild, untamed brush.
And the common blackbird is the critical counterweight in the poem. The woman represents the desperately controlled, assimilated facade, but the blackbird represents the untamed, unassimilable reality of their identity.
Just sitting in the margins.
Exactly, in the very brush where she is throwing her discarded half-ripe cherries.
I found the inclusion of the bird almost mocking, to be honest. The bird knows she's just a visitor. She can pick all the perfect fruit she wants, but she doesn't own the orchard.
Right.
The wildness of the landscape and the wildness of her own displaced identity is just sitting there watching her perform this pantomime of belonging.
That's beautifully put. And this theme of performing identity, or rather the absurdity of cultural objects placed out of context, it escalates dramatically when we examine poem 17.
Smiling Buddhas.
Smiling Buddhas.
This poem is a masterwork of atmosphere. The narrator is no longer in nature. He's indoors, likely in a commercial space, surrounded by these hyper-specific cultural artifacts.
Yeah, you really get the sense of the room.
There are jade dragons. There are Chinese characters painted on the walls. He notices goldfish swimming in a tank, swallowing the copper coins that people have tossed into the water.
It's so vivid.
And hidden amongst all this decorative noise are these smiling Buddhas.
And Gunasekera focuses intensely on the materiality of these objects. He doesn't write about the spiritual essence of the Buddha. He writes about the jade-colored veins of the statues.
Right, he renders it completely physical.
Yes. He describes eyes peering through glasses. He renders the spiritual completely hollow.
But why is he so fixated on the goldfish eating the coins or the painted dragons? Like, as a reader, I felt like I was standing in a cheap restaurant waiting for takeout, just staring blankly at the decor.
Well, that is exactly the emotional register you're meant to feel.
Really?
Yeah. The narrator is observing the commercialization of the Asian diaspora. These objects, the dragons, the Buddhas, the bamboo, they're sacred or deeply meaningful in their original context.
Right, back home.
But here in Australia, they have been uprooted, stripped of their power, and placed in a corner to perform Asianness for a consuming public. They're exotic set dressing.
Ah, I see. And the goldfish swallowing the coin, that is such a brutal metaphor. The living thing is literally consuming the currency of the new world, trapped in a glass tank for observation.
Exactly. And the smiling Buddhas are the ultimate reflection of the narrator's own psychological state.
Because they're performing, too.
Yes. They are placed in a foreign context. They're expected to present a serene, smiling face to the local culture. but they are made of stone.
Oh, wow.
The smile is a rigid, unmoving defense mechanism. The narrator looks at the smiling stone Buddha and recognizes his own survival strategy. He is remaining entirely still, completely alienated, performing his role while internally petrifying.
He is the artifact in the room.
Exactly.
And this petrification, this inability to actually connect, it doesn't just happen in public spaces. It infects his most intimate personal relationships, too. Which brings us to the devastatingly modern landscape of Poem 36.
But Sarah. Poem 36 is where Gunasekera proves his absolute fluency in the modern urban social dynamic. He steps away from the heavy, traditional metaphors of cherry orchards and stone Buddhas and just walks us right into an art gallery or a trendy pub.
Yeah, and Sarah is the archetype of the culturally fluent, hypermodern, cool girl.
Oh, entirely.
Gunasekera gives us these incredibly precise, almost cutting details about her. She has a trendy, half-shaved head. She drinks beer and plays pool effortlessly with the men.
She's intimidating.
She really is. And she possesses this vast, intimidating vocabulary of cultural signifiers. They don't just drink wine, they drink Barossa Valley Merlot.
Right.
They don't just watch movies. They dissect Bernardo Bertolucci films. They trade witty Star Wars jokes.
They are speaking a highly elevated, highly specific language of cultural consumption.
But it's a shield. Reading this poem felt like reading a modern dating app profile brought to life. We curate these massive, intimidating walls of obscure tastes and witty pop culture references specifically so we don't have to show anyone our actual terrifying vulnerabilities.
She's a fortress of cool.
A fortress of cool, exactly.
And if we look at the mechanics of the poem, Gunasekera highlights the absolute uselessness of that fortress. The narrator is deeply infatuated with Sarah.
He's agonizing over her.
Yes. He sits there and watches her soft hands intertwine with the rough, calloused hands of other men as she plays pool or holds her glass.
He is drowning in desire for her.
He is. But what dialogue actually occurs between them in the poem? With all their shared knowledge of Bertolucci, with all their sophisticated banter, what do they actually say to one another?
Nothing. I mean, the poem explicitly notes that their interaction is reduced to two hollow words, good morning and bye.
Right. The vast cultural vocabulary they have spent years cultivating is entirely impotent when it comes to expressing genuine human desire.
Yeah.
The tragedy of Poem 36 is the realization that you can share an entire cultural lexicon with someone and still remain separated by an unbridgeable emotional void.
I want to pause here and introduce a philosophical framework, actually, because Sarah's dynamic demands it. When you look at how the narrator interacts with Sarah, or rather, how he refuses to interact with her, it feels like a textbook example of Zizek's paradox of desire.
Oh, absolutely. Slavoj Žižek's concept of desire is incredibly applicable here.
Could you break that down for the listener?
Sure. So Žižek argues that as human beings, we operate under a profound delusion. We believe that we want to possess the object of our desire.
Right.
But in reality, what we truly want is to continue desiring. We prefer the safe, melancholic distance from the object, because actually attaining the object threatens to destroy the fantasy we've built around it.
Yes. The narrator doesn't actually want to date Sarah. If he confessed his feelings and she rejected him, he'd be crushed. But even worse, what if she accepted him?
Exactly.
What if they went home, the Barossa Merlot wore off, the Bertolucci conversation ended, and she just became an ordinary, flawed human being? The fantasy would be dead.
So he maintains the distance. He hides behind the Star Wars jokes. He tortures himself by watching her hold other men's hands because that torture, that unfulfilled yearning is safe.
It's predictable.
Yes, it is a contained, predictable pain. He's protecting his internal world from the chaotic, unpredictable reality of actual romantic vulnerability.
And this desperation to avoid emotional vulnerability while still craving physical connection, it leads us directly into the darkest, most uncompromising poem in the selection. Poem 32.
No strings attached.
Yeah. If Poem 36 is about the facade of intimacy, Poem 32 is the violent stripping away of that facade. It is a chilling piece of writing.
It really is. Gunasekera sets a very desolate scene. It's a freezing, dark evening. A woman visits the narrator's home. And what is brilliant about the writing here is that he defines the interaction entirely by what it lacks.
Right.
He specifically notes that she does not clean the room. She does not arrange the flowers in the vase. There's no domestic warmth.
The refusal to arrange the flowers is a vital line, because arranging flowers is an act of nesting. It implies a desire to make a space beautiful, to leave a personal caring mark on the environment. She refuses to do this.
She walks in, she smokes a cigarette, she drops her bag in the corner, and they engage in a physical transaction. Gunasekera writes that there are no unnecessary words or fake love.
It is the Ishikin distance taken to its absolute sterile extreme. He's engaging in the most intimate physical act two human beings can share, but he has mathematically eliminated every single vector for emotional connection.
But the emotional toll of that mathematics is just devastating.
Yeah. I want to look closely at the final stanza. The physical act ends. The woman dresses. She picks up her bag and she walks out the door. She doesn't even look back.
No.
And the narrator is left sitting alone in this freezing room. And the only thing he can focus on, the closing image of the poem, is the scent of her white soap lingering on his index finger.
The white soap. It's one of the most haunting sensory details in modern poetry, honestly.
I kept asking myself, why soap? Why not the smell of her cigarette smoke? Why not the scent of her hair or her perfume?
Because perfume implies a lingering identity. Smoke implies a fire that was burning. Soap implies sterilization.
Oh.
It's the scent of a hotel room. It's the scent of washing something away. The scent of soap on his finger is the absolute proof that another human being was just occupying his most intimate space, and yet they left absolutely zero emotional residue.
They washed themselves clean of him before they even left the room.
Exactly. It's the scent of an erasure.
He reached out into the dark for a lifeline. He tried to bridge the gap of his profound isolation through a purely physical transaction, and all he was left with was a handful of soap. His isolation at the end of poem 32 is actually deeper and more profound than it was before she knocked on the door.
He's fortified his glass window. He's ensured that nothing can touch him emotionally, but in doing so, he has condemned himself to the freezer.
And you would think, okay, the transactional hookups are sterile, the art gallery crushes are hollow, but surely he finds warmth in his family. Surely the domestic sphere offers some respite from this diaspora alienation.
You would hope.
Right. But poem 15, a pause, shatters that hope completely.
Poem 15 shifts the setting back out into nature. But the internal architecture of isolation remains identical to the cold room.
Yeah. The narrator is walking through a dry, thorny, unforgiving scrubland. He's with someone the text implies a companion, a wife, and children. And suddenly, amidst this harsh, dead brush, he spots a blooming purple flower bush.
It's an anomaly. It's a tiny miracle of color and life in a hostile environment.
And he makes a request. He turns to his companion and asks a very simple, pleading question. Wouldn't you stop here for a brief rest?
He just wants a moment.
Right, he wants to pause the relentless forward motion of their lives and simply acknowledge that something beautiful has managed to survive in the dirt.
And how does the companion respond?
She doesn't. She doesn't argue. She doesn't disagree. She just silently hurries past him with the children. She completely ignores the plea. They keep walking.
This poem crystallizes a very specific trauma within the immigrant experience, the diaspora rush.
The rush, yeah.
When you transplant your family to a new, potentially hostile environment, survival dictates a relentless, panicked forward momentum. You must keep moving. You must secure the job, pay the mortgage, assimilate the children.
There is literally no time to stop and smell the purple weed.
Exactly. For the companion, pausing is dangerous. Stopping to look at the flower means dropping the armor of forward momentum.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
If she stops to reflect on beauty, the grief of what they left behind might catch up to them. But for the narrator, who is already drowning in melancholia, the refusal to pause is a death sentence.
He's walking right next to his family, physically surrounded by his blood and his partner, and he is entirely, singularly alone in his experience of the world. The silence of the companion is louder than any argument they could have had.
It reinforces the core tragedy of the collection. Proximity does not equal intimacy. Whether it's the sweating bodies on the Gold Coast, the woman in his bed, or the family on the path, the narrator is always a ghost haunting his own life.
And when the present moment refuses to offer you a place to rest, where does your mind go? It goes backward. It retreats into the past, which pulls us into the crushing gravity of poem 34, an unlit screen.
This is where Gunasekera moves from social observation into the visceral, biological reality of memory. For this narrator, memory is not a passive thought. It is an affliction.
The poem starts with an ambush of the senses. The narrator catches the scent of cashew flowers on the wind. He notices the erratic, fluttering silhouette of a bat against the dusk sky. He looks down and sees the silver, slimy trails left by snails on the concrete.
These are incredibly hyper-specific, localized triggers, and they act like a chemical catalyst.
They unlock a memory of a past relationship or a past life, but pay attention to the mechanical reaction of the narrator's body here. He doesn't just feel nostalgic, he doesn't shed a tear.
Now he becomes physically ill.
Right. The memory is so potent, so deeply tied to a profound loss that the scent of the cashew flower induces actual nausea. He feels sick to his stomach. It's a somatic rejection of the past.
This is the perfect moment to apply the Freudian concept of melancholia.
Okay, let's dive into that.
Sigmund Freud drew a very strict line between mourning and melancholia. In mourning, the subject knows exactly what they have lost. A loved one passes away, a house burns down. The grief has a defined object, and over time, the ego processes that loss.
But melancholia is a haunting without a corpse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In melancholia, the loss is experienced at a crushing biological level, but the subject does not have a clear, conscious understanding of what exactly has been lost. The object of grief has been withdrawn from consciousness.
Right.
The diaspora experience is inherently melancholic because you haven't necessarily lost your homeland. It's still on the map, the cashew flowers still bloom there, but you have lost your context. You have lost the version of yourself that existed within that landscape.
You're grieving a phantom limb. And because you can't point to a gravestone, the grief has nowhere to go, so it turns inward and makes you physically nauseous.
And Gunasekera perfectly captures the boringness of that inward turn with the final image of Poem 34. The memory fades, the nausea subsides, and he is left staring at an unlit screen after a show has ended.
We've all experienced that micro moment of existential dread. You're sitting in a dark room, totally absorbed in a movie, the credits roll, the television powers down, the glass goes black, and suddenly the fantasy world vanishes, and you're just staring at your own dark, distorted reflection in the dead glass of the monitor.
The show is over, the relationship never fully materialized, the past cannot be retrieved, and all that remains is the dead glass showing you your own isolation.
And if the dead television screen represents the barrenness of personal memory, we have to look at Poem 38 to understand the barrenness of collective memory and societal structure.
From the stone church to the path.
Yeah. Poem 38 is incredibly heavy. The architecture of the poem mimics the architecture of the building it describes.
It does. The narrator is sitting inside a church. The imagery is oppressive. Gunasekera focuses on the thick, heavy stone walls. He describes them as if they're actively absorbing the secrets, the sins, and the unsaid words of the congregation.
Right. Everyone around him is dressed in stark black. A massive wooden cross casts a long, imposing shadow over the pews.
It does not read like a place of salvation. It reads like a vault.
And what is the narrator doing inside this vault? He isn't praying. He is scanning the crowd. He's frantically searching the sea of black-clad parishioners for one specific face, but he cannot find it.
This is a textbook manifestation of Jacques Lacan's symbolic order.
Oh, interesting. How so?
In Lacanian psychoanalysis, the symbolic order is the realm of language, law, societal structure, and ritual. It's the framework that dictates how we're supposed to behave and how meaning is organized.
Right.
The stone church, with its rituals, its dark clothes, and its towering cross, is the ultimate physical embodiment of the symbolic order.
It is the structure telling everyone how to exist.
But the narrator is entirely alienated from it. He is physically inside the symbolic order, participating in the ritual, but his entire psychological focus is defined by lack, the missing face.
Yeah.
He cannot find meaning in the heavy stones or the shadow of the cross. He can only focus on the void where his desire should be.
He even watches the congregation file out of the church at the end of the service, and he wonders if the people leaving are truly the same as the people who entered.
He's questioning the efficacy of the entire structure.
Exactly. Does this ritual actually change anyone, or are we all just putting on black clothes and performing our piety while slowly suffocating behind the stone walls?
The unsaid things, the repressed desires, and the hidden griefs of the diaspora are heavier than the stones themselves.
So if the beach is oppressive, the cherry orchard is a lie, the bar is a facade, the bedroom is sterile, and the church is a suffocating vault, where does he go? Where does this narrator find an ounce of peace?
It seems the only place left is absolute sensory withdrawal.
Let's look at Poem 39, In a Dark Room.
Poem 39 functions as a necessary psychological retreat. It's a deliberate uncoupling from the demands of the outside world.
It feels incredibly therapeutic, almost room-like. The narrator is resting in a pitch-black room. He focuses on the microscopic sounds, the faint trickling of water. He smells the scent of wild roses. He describes an unscented oil being rubbed onto the body.
It is deeply sensory.
But unlike the sickening scent of the cashew flower or the oppressive heat of the Gold Coast, this sensory input is grounding. It's healing.
Because he controls it. He has built a sensory deprivation tank to protect himself from the crushing weight of the symbolic order.
But the defining moment of the poem happens when the single flickering candle finally dies. The flame goes out. Most people would fear the sudden absolute darkness, but the narrator describes the darkness as guard-like.
Guard-like.
When the light dies, this guard-like darkness is released into the room, and paradoxically, it provides clarity.
It is a stunning inversion. In poetry, light is almost universally a symbol of truth, hope, or revelation.
Right, traditionally.
But for Gunasekera's narrator, light is exposure. Light is the sun beating down on the beach, forcing you to perform. Light is the glare of the art gallery where you have to pretend you care about Bertolucci.
Exactly.
When the artificial light is extinguished, the darkness wraps around him like a protector. He's finally safe because he cannot be seen. He ceases to be the observer, and he ceases to be the observed.
He is allowed to simply exist in the void, but, and I have to push back on this idea that the void is purely peaceful, because we have to contrast Poem 39 with Poem 37.
Free from the night.
Freed from the night. He retreats into the dark here as well, but the result is entirely different.
Poem 37 is arguably the critical hinge of the entire collection. This is where the psychological fragmentation really begins to show its fractures.
The setup is deeply relatable. The narrator is at a social gathering, a party with friends, there's music, conversation, laughter. But the internal pressure is just too high. He cannot tolerate the noise of living, so he escapes.
He walks out of the house.
Right, away from the light in the party, and he finds a broken chair sitting alone in the dark yard.
He deliberately isolates himself from the community.
He sits in the absolute silence, staring into the dark. And then the poem delivers this incredible, haunting moment. As he sits there shivering in the night, he feels an unseen presence approach him. And this invisible entity gently puts an arm around his shoulder.
An unseen arm.
Now, what are we meant to do with this? From a textual standpoint, is this a literal ghost story? Is it the spirit of someone he left behind in Sri Lanka? Or, and this is sort of my theory, is the narrator experiencing such profound psychological alienation that his own mind is splitting in two, manifesting an external presence, just so he can finally receive a modicum of comfort?
Your instinct to question the nature of the entity is exactly what the poem demands. The ambiguity is not a flaw, it's the entire point. Gunasekera isn't writing a supernatural thriller here.
Right.
It fundamentally does not matter if the arm belongs to a ghost, a memory, or a fractured piece of the narrator's own psyche.
The reality of the comfort is what matters.
Yes. The devastating reality is that the living, breathing human beings sitting just 20 feet away inside the brightly lit house are incapable of comforting him. They're just noise.
Wow.
The gap between him and the rest of humanity is so vast that the only entity capable of bridging it, the only thing that can put an arm around his shoulder and understand his melancholia, is the void itself. He is literally being embraced by his own shadow.
He has become a ghost being comforted by ghosts. And you can only sustain that level of psychological pressure for so long before the structural integrity fails. You cannot live in the guard-like darkness forever. Which brings us to the climax of our analysis. Poem 27.
The broken glass window.
Yes. Everything we have discussed, the unsaid words, the sterile soap, the nausea, the heavy stones, it all rushes toward this single violent point of release.
This poem is a magnificent piece of structural metaphor. Gunasekera focuses our attention on a tightly closed glass window. But he doesn't focus on the glass itself. He focuses on the immense, invisible labor the window is performing before it breaks.
Right. The window is holding back the wind. It's holding back the noise of the street. It is desperately maintaining the boundary between the quiet, safe interior and the chaotic exterior.
It is the ultimate symbol of the rigid, assimilated immigrant persona holding back the breakdown.
But inevitably, the pressure becomes too great. The glass shatters. And what happens? You expect disaster. You expect the poem to treat the breaking of the window as a tragedy. But it doesn't.
No, not at all.
When the glass shatters, the outside world rushes in, the sunlight floods the dark room, the scent of fresh flowers drifts over the sill, and most importantly, the stagnant, suffocating secrets that were trapped inside the room finally escape into the open air.
It is a total subversion of the concept of a nervous breakdown. In Lacanian terms, the breaking of the window is the shattering of the symbolic order, which allows the chaotic, untamed real to finally flood in.
It's terrifying, but it's liberating.
Exactly. In the diaspora community, there is a tremendous unspoken mandate to keep your window intact. You must not crack. You must keep the job, maintain the marriage, smile like the stone Buddha, and never let anyone see the fractures.
The unbroken window is celebrated as strength.
Yes, but Gunasekera exposes it as a self-made prison.
And he drives that point home with the final lines of the poem, which are just staggering. He writes that the other windows, the tightly closed, unbroken windows sitting in the neighboring houses, look at the shattered window with subtle jealousy.
Subtle jealousy, yeah.
They are sitting in their rusty frames, suffocating under the pressure, secretly hoping for a stray stone to hit them. They are praying for their rusty locks to squeak and give way so they too can finally breathe.
It is a profound declaration. The unbroken windows are jealous of the shattered glass because the broken window is no longer performing. It is finally a participant in the real world again. Sometimes, total structural collapse is the only avenue left for survival.
Okay, we have navigated the emotional labyrinth of these 11 pillars. I want to shift our focus slightly and look at the actual mechanics of the work. How is Nirasha Gunasekera physically constructing these traps on the page? Let's dive into the poet's craft.
The defining characteristic of his craft is his ferocious economy of words. He is operating with surgical precision.
That's what struck me, too. He tackles these massive, nebulous themes: exile, existential dread, the nature of desire, but he never uses sweeping, abstract language. He never just declares, I feel sad and disconnected in Australia.
Never.
He forces the abstraction into highly localized, highly specific physical objects.
He anchors the ephemeral into the tangible. If a poet simply tells a reader they're experiencing heartbreak, the reader might conceptually sympathize, but they don't feel the pain. It remains an idea.
Right.
But Gunasekera doesn't tell you about his heartbreak. He forces you to sit in a freezing room and smell the sterile white soap left on your fingers by a woman who just walked out the door without looking back.
He traps you in the sensory reality of the pain. The 40-degree heat on the Gold Coast, the violent discarding of a half-ripe cherry, the heavy shadow of a wooden cross. You can touch his melancholia.
And we must talk about his use of rhythm and silence. He predominantly writes in free verse, which gives him immense control over the pacing of the emotional reveal. The way he utilizes line breaks and white space on the page is critical.
It feels halting.
Exactly. The rhythm mimics the hesitant, calculating heartbeat of someone who feels they're under constant surveillance in a foreign land. A stanza will end abruptly, surrounded by white space, forcing the reader to sit in the uncomfortable silence before the next thought begins.
He weaponizes the unsaid.
Yes. The space between the stanzas in Poem 36, between the Star Wars jokes and the hollow good morning, that blank space is where the actual tragedy is happening.
Which brings us to the question of raw talent versus controlled execution. When you read a collection that's relentlessly intimate, it's easy to assume you're just reading someone's bleeding diary entries. Does this work feel instinctive to you, or is it meticulously engineered?
Oh, it is fiercely engineered.
Really?
Yes. The raw talent is evident in his observational powers, his ability to notice the snail trail or the sweat under the strap. But the execution is highly controlled. A lesser poet would succumb to melodrama. They would explain the joke.
Right, they'd want to make sure you got the metaphor.
Exactly. Gunasekera's ultimate strength is his restraint. He sets the scene, he gives you the scent of the cashew flower, he introduces the nausea, and then he simply cuts to black with the unlit screen. He trusts the reader to do the psychological math.
He refuses to hold your hand. But I think we need to offer some constructive critique here as well. We've praised the surgical nature of the work, but what are the limitations of this approach?
The most valid critique of focusing intensely on these specific poems, and perhaps of the collection as a whole, is the issue of emotional density. It is exhausting.
It is a very, very heavy read.
There is virtually no oxygen in the room until the glass finally breaks in Poem 27. The melancholia is so relentless, so perfectly sealed, that a reader could easily feel suffocated by it. The collection asks you to submerge yourself entirely in a depressive, alienated state, and it offers very little in the way of hope or relief.
I also think the hyperspecificity is a double-edged sword. The references to Barossa Valley Merlot, Bernardo Bertolucci films, and the exact temperature of the Gold Coast, these ground the poem beautifully in a modern reality.
We do.
But they might also alienate a reader who is coming to poetry looking for timeless, universal fables. If you don't know the cultural weight of a cool girl with a half-shaved head playing pool, Poem 36 might lose a bit of its sting.
That is a fair assessment. It is a deeply 21st century, deeply urban work. But I would argue that specificity is precisely what elevates it above the cliches of traditional diaspora poetry.
I agree completely. It anchors the pain in the here and now.
As we look at the legacy of Beaming Petals in a Henna Vine, it really represents a vital evolution in how we write about migration. The older narratives often focused on the physical longing for the soil of the motherland.
Right, the nostalgia factor.
Yeah, but Gunasekera moves us past the map. He explores the profound, complex psychological displacement of the modern immigrant who is successfully assimilated on paper, they drink the right wine, they live in the right suburbs, but who is internally petrifying.
The narrator isn't crying because he misses Sri Lanka. He is agonizing over the hollow, transactional nature of intimacy in a trendy Australian art gallery. It is an incredibly fresh, necessary perspective on the cost of survival.
It is a masterwork of observing the observer.
It truly is. Well, we have reached the end of our time in the dark room. We have traced the architecture of the unbroken window, and we've felt the rush of the wind when it finally gives way. Before we go, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to carry with you today.
I think we've established how much pressure it takes to maintain the facade.
Right. We've talked extensively about the immense pressure required to be the smiling stone Buddha, to ignore the purple weed, to keep the glass intact at all costs.
The unbroken window only breeds jealousy and isolation.
Right. So I want you to ask yourself, what is the tightly closed window in your own life? What is the rigid structure you are desperately maintaining to keep the chaotic, beautiful, terrifying reality of the world at bay? And more importantly, what is the heavy stone you are secretly hoping will fly out of the dark, shatter your glass, and finally let the light in?
A phenomenal question to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Nirasha Gunasekera's poetic landscape. We hope it inspired you to look a little closer at the art and the invisible glass that surrounds you. Until next time.